Disclaimer. The information, views, opinions, and thoughts expressed in the readings are of the respective authors. We, the producer and reader, do not claim allegiance to them in any way. The content and references should be perceived keeping in mind the period when it was written and not according to the present context. The limited but sincere goal of this series is to offer the listener unedited and original content. Thank you.
The Music Book Club presents Pillars of Hindustani Music by B.R. Deodhar, read by LAXMI BIRAJDAR. AFTAB MOUSIKI, Ustad Faiyyaz KHANSAHEB. It was around 1924 that I got to know Pandit Bhatkhande. Thereafter, I used to call on him occasionally. His favorite theme whenever we met was the decline and paucity of first-rate musicians. He used to say, "The number of top-notch vocalists and instrumentalists is now small enough to be counted on the fingers of one's hand. The really great Dhrupad and Khayal singers and bean players have all departed. The quality of vocal and instrumental music we people used to hear has become extremely rare now." Being in the prime of life and full of youthful arrogance, I used to dismiss this comment as an elderly person's chatter. Panditji and people of his generation, having crossed into their 60s and therefore become incapable of making any substantial contribution of their own, would predictably build up the long departed in the presence of young musicians. It gave them a sort of perverse satisfaction because they resented youth and secretly envied us. No matter what progress we made, they would refuse to accept us or acknowledge us. That is how I generally looked at all elderly critics then, and, needless to say, resented Panditji's oft-repeated comment. One day, a young popular musician who was becoming something of a celebrity gave a recital. There were about 400 to 500 people in the audience. After the pure classical part was over, he turned to stage music. The audience was enthralled, and there were continuous outbursts of applause and appreciative exclamations. The very next morning, I called on Panditji, believing that when I told him about the tremendous ovation the young musician had received, he would have to change his views about up-and-coming artists. I gave a most colorful account of the previous night's recital, how the singer had held the audience spellbound, etc., and waited for his response. I looked at him with triumph and challenge in my eyes, as if to say, "Try to run down young musicians now." Panditji listened to me quietly. Then he took up my enthusiastic defense of the young singer point by point and explained how, in the context of classical music, what I considered virtues were in reality vices. He systematically demolished every one of my arguments. I felt chagrined and angrily asked him, "Panditji, you do not approve of any musician of our generation. Is there anyone at all who comes up to your standards?" Panditji said, "Have you heard Faiyyaz Khan of Baroda? You should. Then alone you will understand what the highest type of traditional music is." In those days, Faiyyaz Khan was not too well known in Bombay, and I, at any rate, had not even seen him. In 1926 or 1927, I came to know that Khansaheb was in Bombay. I found out where he was staying and went to see him. I invited him to our school for a recital one Sunday morning. I deliberately invited several well-known musicians for the occasion so as to provide Khansaheb with the sort of audience his music deserved. Khansaheb started his recital with an astai in Rag Ramkali and immediately brought the entire audience under the spell of his pure classical style of music. Within the first 10 minutes, every member of the audience was filled with tonal ecstasy. In the next few years, Bombay saw the rise of music circles, because of which Bombay audiences became accustomed to hearing him at least 3 or 4 times every year. From 1935 onwards, I started visiting various places in North India in connection with annual music conferences, where again I could frequently attend his recitals. And later still, when Khansaheb began to sing regularly on the All India radio, everyone could hear his music without difficulty. The lives of most of the musicians I had encountered seemed to follow a uniform pattern. Early youth spent in severe hardships, starvation, strenuous demeaning service to the Guru, and finally, after all this, success. That was the story of almost every singer's life. However, Khansaheb Faiyyaz Khan proved to be an exception to the rule. On his father's side, Khan Sahab was the great-grandson of the famous composer known as Rangile. And on his mother's side, he was the great-grandson of Ghagge Khuda Bakhsh, the famous founder of the Agra Gharana. Khan Sahab's first wife was the daughter of Faiz Muhammad Khan, Pandit Bhaskar Bua Bakhle's guru, and his second wife was the daughter of Khan Sahab Mehboob Khan. Mehboob Khan was no other than the celebrated composer who wrote under the name Darasipiya and composed numerous beautiful bandishes. Atta Hussain, who invariably accompanied Faiyyaz Khan on the sarangi, was Darasipiya's son. Khan Sahab's forebears, both on his father's and mother's side, were musicians from ancient times. In the old days, they were exponents of Dhrupad Dhamar and were closely related to the well-known Dhrupad singers of Tilwandi. Consequently, knowledge of Dhrupad Dhamar was automatically inherited by Faiyyaz Khan's family. The celebrated composer known to history as Rangile was, as I have said earlier, Faiyyaz Khan's great-grandfather. He composed many extraordinarily beautiful bandishes, well-known and not so well-known, in numerous ragas which are being sung to this day. For instance, the bandish So Bar Balama in Rag Lalit. The name Rangile is not to be confused with Sadrang, which was the pseudonym of a different composer. The latter's real name was Niyamat Khan, who served as a singer at the court of the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah of Delhi. Sadrang immortalized his master's name by referring to him as Sadrangile Mom Madsa, that is, perpetually lively or gay Muhammad Shah. The Rangile period came after that Sadrang. Khan Sahab Aladia Khan had many Rangile bandishes in his repertoire. Faiyyaz Khan's great-grandfather on the mother's side was Ghagge Khuda Bakhsh, who was trained by Nathan Pir Bakhsh in Khayal music. Nathan Pir Bakhsh was the grandfather of Dada Haddu Khan of Gwalior, which means that the Gaiki of Agra Gharana or the Khayal Gaiki is really an offshoot of Gwalior Gharana. The distance between Agra and Mathura is barely 30 or 35 miles, and the dialect spoken in this entire region is a variety of Hindi known as Braj Bhasha. In other words, Braj Bhasha was Faiyyaz Khan's mother tongue. About 90% of all bandishes are in Braj. Since Khan Sahab's ancestors on both sides of the family were poetically endowed, it is small wonder that he also inherited this gift. He has composed extensively and beautifully under the pseudonym Prem Piya. Kallan Khan's son, Tasadduq Hussain Khan, used to live with Faiyyaz Khan at Baroda. He has also composed numerous bandishes under the name Vinod Piya. Khan Sahab was fortunate enough to have inherited from his ancestors all their gifts: poetic talent, skill in musical composition, and mastery of vocal music. Khan Sahab's mother left her husband during pregnancy and went to live with her father Khan Sahab Ghulam Abbas Khan at Agra. Ghulam Abbas Khan, who was fond of children but had no male child of his own, very enthusiastically brought up Faiyyaz. He began to receive music lessons from his grandfather at a very early age. Ghulam Abbas Khan, while dandling child Faiyyaz on his knees, would make him learn bandishes by rote. Faiyyaz, being a bright and happy child, was the object of everybody's admiration, and since those who called at the house were all musicians, everybody added to his knowledge of music. He was encouraged to participate in mehfils and patted by everyone. Faiyyaz was a good performer from a very early age and had a substantial collection of bandishes. Khan Sahab Ghulam Abbas Khan used to go on extended concert tours for 7 to 8 months at a time every year and take little Faiyyaz with him. Ghulam Abbas Khan invariably spent a month or two with Chhatre's circus, enabling Faiyyaz to hear the music of the great Rahimat Khan to his heart's content. Ghulam Abbas Khan arranged for the boy to hear every renowned singer. He would make the boy sit by his side and explain to him the finer points of their individual styles. Since Khan Sahab Nathan Khan lived at Mysore, grandfather and grandson also used to pay frequent visits to that place. In 1906, Faiyyaz gave a recital in Mysore Darbar, which was so brilliant that the Maharaja honored him and awarded a gold medal to him. The occasion was the first public recognition of his musical talent and proved to be the first of many honors he was to receive. He was then 20 years old. In 1912, Maharaja Sayaji Rao heard Faiyyaz for the first time and promptly appointed him his court singer. Faiyyaz Khan moved to Baroda and spent the rest of his life there. His fame spread far and wide after he became a resident of Baroda, and his simple Faiyyaz was transformed into the more prestigious Ustad Faiyyaz Khan. KHANSAHEB Ghulam Abbas Khan moved in with his beloved grandson. He was able to watch Faiyyaz Khan's growing fame and the countrywide recognition from close quarters and died a happy and contented man at the ripe age of 110. In Hindustani music, considerable importance is attached to traditional gharana training. Each gharana follows a distinct tradition. The training methods or methods of instruction are not identical, but generally speaking, they follow a uniform pattern which goes somewhat as follows. When a student has mastered tonal accuracy, he is made to repeat progressive note combinations. When the student's voice has acquired the necessary accuracy and fluency, he is taught individual ragas. In some gharanas, the student is taught Dhrupad dhamars from various ragas before he learns khayal singing. He is made to repeat set tonal sentences, that is, short alaps, innumerable times so that he automatically masters note combinations which are specific to each rag. Singers belonging to the last generation, although completely unaware of what shrutis meant or what frequencies they represented, could unerringly produce the tonal variations in various notes appropriate to each rag, a komal and atikomal re, etc., etc. The secret lies in the exacting training they had received from the Guru. It was only after the student had mastered this type of alapi that the Guru would start him on a bandish. The point I am trying to make is that KHANSAHEB Faiyyaz Khan was trained in this manner from an early age, and that was what made his music so strikingly disciplined. In the old days, there was a widely prevalent belief that a good singer must sing in a relatively high key, that is, in the black fourth key of the harmonium. Several musicians whose voices were naturally low-pitched used to train in an unnaturally high key, which inevitably put a great strain on their voices and damaged them. During recitals, it was a matter of speculation whether they would be able to hit the desired key accurately. At times, they had to spend an hour or two to coax or bully their vocal cords to grope for the necessary note, all of which resulted from the mistaken notion that good vocal music necessarily meant music in a high key. Faiyyaz Khan, having recognized the low-pitched quality of his voice, refused to fall prey to the popular belief and trained in his natural voice. He sang in a particularly low key, first white or first black of the harmonium, and yet, because it had not been subjected to injurious strains, his voice was full, commanding, and resonant. I can speak from my experience that even when he hit the G of the lower octave, the note was clearly audible in the back rows. Faiyyaz Khan's voice was not particularly sweet, but it was forceful. In reality, KHANSAHEB was a khayal singer, but was inordinately fond of things like Nomthom, Hori, and Dhrupad. The true Hori is one sung in Tal Dhamar. In the old days, every gharana khayal singer had to have training in Dhrupad singing. In Dhrupad Dhamar compositions, the bylaws of ragas and their individual structural qualities had been very skillfully interwoven. Consequently, training in these compositions was a necessary prelude to khayal training. In khayal-type compositions, especially fast-moving ones, one cannot always be certain of meeting with strict adherence to the structural rules governing a particular rag. It is much easier to observe the rules in alapi than in tans. Since KHANSAHEB came from a family of Dhrupad singers, Dhrupad Dhamar was his natural inheritance. While on concert tours with his grandfather, Ghulam Abbas Khan, Faiyyaz Khan had had plenty of opportunities to hear the recitals of old Dhrupad singers as well as their Nomthom. As a rule, singers whose forte is alapi or who are especially fond of alapi, favor well-known ragas like Todi, Asavari, Multani, Mia Malhar, Yaman, Darbari Kannada, and so on. But Khan Sahab could present not so well-known ragas like Ramkali, Desi, Sindhura, Barwa, Khat, Megh Malhar, and Maluha Kedar, and the Nomthum corresponding to each with equal facility. Having received perfect training in vocalizing the characteristic notes of each rag, including the individual kanas, Khan Sahab was able to sketch the complete outline of the chosen rag right at the start of his presentation, that is, in the first 3 or 4 notes of his Nomthom. I heard the rag Megh Malhar from numerous singers, but invariably I was left with a feeling of disappointment. Khayal experts, during their recitals, turned to Tan with such inordinate haste that the outline of Malhar was effaced and replaced by Sarang. To use all the notes of Sarang and yet create an unmistakable picture of Malhar is possible only with a Dhrupad type presentation in which gamaks figure prominently. Khan Sahab knew this perfectly well and could, therefore, present Malhar with such mastery. Around 90% of our vintage bandishes are in Braj, and the rest are in other languages such as Marwari, Punjabi, Urdu, Bihari, and Persian. Khan Sahab, being an Agra man, had perfect command of Braj. Whenever he presented a khayal, each word of the text emerged with transparent clarity and with all its emotional appeal, so that even listeners who had no knowledge of Braj could follow what was being said. The emotion embodied in each word was mirrored in Khan Sahab's mobile features, which lent his khayal presentation a singular appeal. In his recitals, Khan Sahab meticulously observed all the rules and regulations of the Gwalior Gharana. A typical Gwalior presentation runs as follows. First, the entire bandish is sung precisely as received from the Guru. Next come individual words of the text embellished by a variety of appropriate note combinations. The structure of the particular rag is built up by varied alapi. This is followed by bol-ang and finally tans. After the vilambit or slow-moving bandish, a fast-moving bandish from the same rag is offered and the presentation is terminated. This sort of orderly building up of a rag holds the listener's attention and the impression of monotony is avoided. When I asked Khan Sahab how Agra Gharana Gaiki differed from that of Gwalior, he said, "Our musicians were responsible for introducing layakari or rhythmic play in Gwalior Gaiki. Rhythm figures prominently in our tan and also in the bol-ang. That is a special feature of Agra Gharana Gaiki." During recitals, Khan Sahab enjoyed immensely his treatment of bol-ang and his mastery of all forms of rhythmic play. I once heard him sing the bandish Piya Sanga Khelori in Rag Basant. The tal was fast trital. The composition is about a vivacious damsel inviting her friends to join her in enjoying the spring. The spring has come, everybody is brimming over with happiness. Let us don bright colored garments, bedeck ourselves with garlands of flowers, and play hori with our lovers. The girl is in ecstasy and herself very eager to play. At times, she entreats her friends to go with her, and in between, she runs about here and there and tries to drag her friends along one by one. Khan Sahab was able to create the entire scene for the audience by skillful employment of the words of the text and appropriate note combinations. And since each emotion was mirrored in his expressive features, you did not have to be a connoisseur of music to understand what he was trying to convey. Occasionally, and unlike most musicians, Khan Sahab would pick up a line of the text, other than the first line of the bandish, from the astai or the antara, and play around with the words of the text with such absorption that the listener might mistake the phrases for the opening lines of the bandish. For instance, the words Daru Ho Garva occur at the end of the astai of the bandish from Basant I have just mentioned. Khan Sahab did so many improvisations with the help of these words that for a moment I thought they were the initial words or mukra of the bandish. Khan Sahab generally favored well-known ragas in his recitals, but if he was in the right mood and the audience discerning, he could sing unfamiliar ragas with the same dexterity. I heard him sing ragas like Bangal, Shuddhanat, Pancham, Ram Gauri, Sham Kalyan, and Maluha Kedar extraordinarily well. Khan Saheb's khayal singing was never tedious. He rarely spent more than half an hour or at the most 45 minutes on any rag, but sometimes he stayed too long on his nom thom, which the less discerning listener did find boring. Usually, however, his perception of the kind of audience he had, which ragas he should sing, and for what length of time was sound. Consequently, his recitals had a freshness which hardly ever wore off. I asked Khan Saheb, "Who taught you Thumri and Dadra?" He replied, "No one taught me. I listened and began to sing them. In my youth, I frequently visited places like Banaras, Delhi, and Lucknow, where I was able to hear renowned Thumri singers, male and female, of each place to my heart's content. In those days, professional women singers invariably extended hospitality to all visiting Gharana singers. It was an ancient custom to give a banquet in honor of visiting maestri. First, there was eating and drinking, and afterwards, music. The hostess and her friends and relations sang first. After that, the invited celebrity took the stage. All in all, I must have been present at thousands of such musical banquets where I was able to hear Thumris sung by numerous singers of both sexes. That is how I learned to sing Thumris." What Khan Saheb said sounded convincing. When Khan Saheb started singing Thumri, he would start making gestures similar to those of professional women singers. He may have picked up the habit unconsciously from the women Thumri singers he had heard. Whatever that may be, he could sing Banarasi type of Thumri in an appealing manner. Having participated successfully in thousands of mehfils from his childhood, Khan Saheb was a shrewd judge of what his audience wanted and would modify his presentation accordingly. Thumri and Dadra singers, after having spent some time on Astai and Antara, habitually insert an amorous line or two of a famed sher or lines picked up from the poems of well-known saint poet, after which they skillfully pick up the threads of the Thumri once again. Khan Saheb was able to perform this acrobatic part with consummate skill and thereby hold the attention of even listeners whose understanding of classical music was minimal. I heard Khan Saheb sing ghazals too in a most attractive manner. He was able to tackle every type of music, right from Hori and Drupad to Thumri, ghazal, etc., with panache and mastery. No wonder he was often referred to as the complete vocalist. As musicians go, Khan Saheb was an extraordinarily lucky person. Money came to him from his early childhood. On one occasion, Maharaja Tukoji Rao, the ruler of Indore, was so pleased with his recital that he promptly took off the expensive necklace worth some 10 or 15,000 rupees he was wearing and presented it to Khan Saheb. He received numerous gold medals and cash awards from other princes. A liberal spender, he never accumulated money. He lived in luxury and always in company of his friends. I heard him line up his priorities: eating and drinking, clothes, and finally, if there is money left, the household. He closely stuck to his economic priorities. The only exception was the gold medals awarded to him. These he preserved jealously. Whenever he visited an unfamiliar place for a concert, he did not feel happy unless he had gone for a stroll on the main street with a silver-handled walking stick in hand and all the medals glittering on his sherwani. He was unassuming and without a trace of conceit. Being prone to extraneous influences, the simplicity of his behavior might undergo a change according to the company he was keeping, but as soon as the companionship was over, his original temperament reasserted itself. At his house in Baroda, every musician was treated in a friendly and courteous manner. The visitor would be urged to stay with him, or at least partake of tea or snacks at his house. He felt uneasy unless such hospitality had been extended to every caller. Once a friend, concerned about his extravagant habits, persuaded him to keep proper accounts. He agreed. That is to say, whenever he paid out any sum of money, he would scrupulously ask the person to itemize all he spent on a piece of paper. But since he kept all these bits of paper in his pocket without ever looking at them, he never did know how much money had been actually spent. To his mind, his accounting responsibility had been discharged in that he had these bits of paper with him. In 1948, Khan Sahab's health suffered a serious setback and there was a general feeling of anxiety about his recovery. Fortunately, as there were a number of skilled physician friends to look after him, he soon rallied round. For a few months, he was unable to sing, which is what worried him most. I remember him saying to me at the time, "Deodar Sahab, within a few days I shall regale you with first-rate music." As a matter of fact, his health improved perceptibly. He attended a few music conferences and gave recitals, although his vitality had declined. In 1950, when his chest was x-rayed, doctors found that he was suffering from TB. He had intermittent fever. On the evening of November 5, 1950, Vilayat Hussain Khan, Azmat Hussain, Khadam Hussain, all related to Faiyyaz Khan some way or other, went to Baroda to see him. It was evening by the time they arrived. They found him conscious. He was even able to exchange a few words with all of them. But gradually, he became weaker and weaker. He passed away around 8 p.m. the same night. On November 11, 1950, we held a condolence meeting for him at our school, at which musicians representing all gharanas were present to offer him tributes. A great musician who elevated the Agra tradition to its highest point had left the world of music forever.